but nobody's listening here. You knock knock, but nobody's home in the West. You know? Hi friends, and thank you for tuning in. Guys, the delusion is contagious. You know, once you become delusional, I think there's no way back. I think the process is irreversible. I've just been browsing some news that I came across this article that has been recently published on Ukrainska Pravda, and according to former NATO Secretary General Rasmussen, Putin's plan A was to conquer the whole of Ukraine in a few days. Now, you and I, we know better. I mean, even common sense knows better than that, but that's what he's claiming. So let's go through the article and dissect it bit by bit. Mate, these people have such pompous titles like NATO Secretary General. If they would only look for the brains to go along with the title, you know, to be on a good level. But no, the brains are here, the title is there. That's the West for you these days, people. That's the West for you. Former NATO Secretary General says that Putin's Plan A has failed. Next year will be crucial. Former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen believes that Vladimir Putin is betting on weakening the West instead of rapidly seizing Ukraine. Okay. I am afraid that this will be a long war. Putin's Plan A to conquer the whole of Ukraine in a few days has failed. His Plan B is a frozen conflict and Russian occupation of eastern Ukraine in the hope that the West will weaken and give in, he added. Everything he said right there, guys, every single syllable that came out of this weasel's mouth is incorrect and false. So let's go at the beginning. He's saying that Putin's plan A was to conquer Ukraine in a few days. Let's think for a second, shall we? When this war broke out, Russia invaded with about 190,000 troops. Now, if you know anything, well, no, let me reword that. Even if you don't know anything about military warfare, you can clearly see that you can't conquer a country with 190,000 people. You can't. Not even maybe a country of the size of Luxembourg. But not Ukraine, who's the largest country in Europe apart from Russia. Do you know what I mean? He's claiming that that was Putin's plan A. No. Let me tell you what Putin's plan A was, because he said it, and people around him said it for many, many years now. Well, for 2 years. But nobody's listening here. You knock knock, but nobody's home in the West. You know? Putin's plan A was to show he's serious about no NATO membership for Ukraine, and the conflict in Donbass needed to be resolved. That was his main aim. And he thought, and that was a gross miscalculation on his part, by the way, he thought that if he invaded with a sizable force, because, I mean, 190,000 people is still a sizable force, the West and Ukraine will actually realize, look, this is serious, we need to sit down and have a conversation. Now, what evidence do I have to support this claim? Well, first is the number of forces. You don't invade with 200,000 people and hope to conquer the biggest country in Europe. Second, he's had multiple conversations with Ukrainians and he's made multiple calls to a negotiated peace in Istanbul, which Boris Johnson, remember that clown, he actually derailed. He flew into Kiev and he convinced Zelensky, oh, no, you do not go to peace with Russia. In fact, Boris Johnson said he might be ready, but we're not. I need to look it up, but I'm pretty certain those were his words at the time. So what do you mean, maybe Zelensky is ready, but the West is not? Apparently the West is not involved. That's why we keep claiming now for 2 years. Oh no, this is Ukraine. Only Ukraine can decide, really. Well, when Ukraine wanted to decide, because that's why they engaged in conversations with the Russians in Istanbul, the West didn't like what Ukraine chose. You know, this is the Western democracy, people. Let's just put it on display here. We only go along with the result as long as it favors the handful of people who pull the strings. And those people, they're not based in Europe. They're based across the pond, across the ocean, in the promised land of the United States. So that was Putin's plan A. Okay? It was never about conquering Ukraine. Putin has no business conquering Ukraine. He doesn't want Ukraine. What he wanted is to ensure that the Russian-speaking population is safe in the eastern Ukraine, and NATO membership will not be on the table for Ukraine. Oh, why, Seb? Why does Putin get to dictate that? Well, he doesn't get to dictate anything. It's just the common sense dictates that if the West sees Russia as an enemy, Putin would not be comfortable with seeing NATO missiles within 2 minutes a flight range to Moscow. How do you think the Americans would react if the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians would say, do you know what, Mexico? Can we build some military bases here on your territory, on the Rio Grande or on the Rio Grande? Can we build a military base here? Can we put some missiles? I don't know. And Mexico will say, yeah, of course, we have the right to self-determination. We are sovereign. How do you think US would react? I bet the conversation would be different. People, we are not stupid, but these guys keep thinking we are. I think only the most indoctrinated people could read this and think, yeah, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Let's carry on. His plan B is a frozen conflict. What do you mean that's the plan B? Actually, Putin and Lavrov both said just last week, I think it was Putin himself. When he was in Vietnam, he took a lot of questions. I think the whole press conference lasted for about 90 minutes. And one of the questions was about this. And he said, we absolutely do not want a ceasefire or anything like that. If there's going to be negotiations, it's not going to be a ceasefire in between. Clearly, he doesn't want a frozen conflict. Do you know who wants frozen conflicts? The West. The West loves frozen conflicts. Hence why we have the saying, the forever wars. Because we never really fully commit. We stir up the you know what, and then we let it simmer. And then we go home when everything has been plundered to death. That's what we do. That's not what they do. And this, whatever the outcome of this war, and I think we all know what the outcome will be, but I think it's a matter of time. We don't know when, but we know the end result. It's not going to be a long, forever war. That much I am certain of. And then the last thing he says is that Putin is now banking on the fact that the West will weaken and give in. Well, I think that's a logical conclusion, because the West doesn't have an unlimited ability to print money. It really doesn't. I mean, that's what we've been doing for a very long time. But you know, the debt of the collective West combined, guys, it's insurmountable. But that's another conversation, which I'm going to make a video about very soon, because it's getting out of control. Let's carry on with the article. The former NATO Secretary General suggested that the war in Ukraine will last at least until the end of 2024, as Putin hopes that the US presidential election will bring changes that will help him in one way or another. This is not about helping Putin. I think Putin is fine. Look at Russia's economy. They don't need Europe. They don't need the United States. But you see, this is the problem. The West has been so propagandized into thinking that everybody needs them. Everybody wants something from them. Now, the second statement might be true. People might want things from the West, but people don't necessarily need the West in order to be prosperous, self-sufficient, happy, and free, especially the last one. If you really want to be free, then you really don't want to have anything to do with the West, people. Point being, these guys, they still think they're exceptional, that they're essential to the world well-being. They're really not. None of them. Moving on. Quote, I think next year will be crucial if we give the Ukrainians everything they need to not only survive, but to win the war. They have a good chance of pushing the Russians back. How do these statements help? What are the Ukrainians winning on the battlefield exactly? I think lately, for the past weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, I think they're losing anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 people per day. Everywhere you look, even in the most staunch mainstream media places in the West, they're all admitting Ukraine is on the back foot. Now, that's a massive understatement. That's the understatement of the year. But regardless, even they say that. And then comes Rasmussen, knock, knock, nobody home, saying, well, The Ukrainians can push the Russians back. Are you out of your mind? Have you looked at the map? There's a map. Well, there's more. I use one. It's called Live UA Map. In fact, you know what? Let me bring it on the screen for you guys, just so you know what I'm talking about. Have you had a look at this map? Do you follow it every day? I sincerely doubt you do, but you should. Because on this map, and by the way, this is a this is a Ukrainian favored map. Look at this. Look at what's going on there. On what part is Ukraine winning anything? You, Mr. Rasmussen, let us know. Educate us a little bit. But you know what? Forget about this whistle. Let's carry on. Now, this is Ukrainska Pravda giving you some background, apparently. Let's see what the background is, shall we? Earlier this year, a poll showed that support for Ukraine among Europeans remained broad, but only 10% believe Ukraine could defeat Russia. Oh, really? So what does that tell you? If basically nobody thinks Ukraine can defeat Russia, how come there's still plenty of support, they call it? It's because that support was never really meant to help Ukraine in this fight. That was a vehicle for these neocons and warmongers to siphon the money off from you and me and send it to the MIC, who then will send the money back in return in the form of kickbacks. That's the whole scheme. That has been the whole scheme for the longest time. Because think about it. If you don't believe something, why would you do it? I'm just asking for a friend. I'm asking for Ivan. Ivan is here asking me, Seb, why? Guys, this is a comedy. This is an absolute shite show on display right here. When you think that people like this, let me put him on the screen so you can see who I'm talking about. When people like this are telling you these, I can't even use the word lie, because this is so much beneath a lie. This is something that you would only hear in a mental asylum. It's not a lie, it's way beyond that. These are the people who are in charge of your safety. There you go, people. Guys, I don't want to drag the video too long. Please let me know in the comment sections what you think. And until the next time, be well, take care, and bye-bye.